Hi, and welcome back to Companion Saga. Today, a grandfather thinks he's just helping his family move into a new house. What he finds in the basement will change everything. Here we go. The door shouldn't have been warm. I was standing in my daughter's new basement at 14 inches the afternoon on a Saturday in November, and the door at the far end of the hallway was warm to the touch. Not the rest of the basement. The rest of the basement was what you'd expect from a house built in 1967 cold concrete, exposed pipes, the faint smell of must, and old laundry. But this door, the one at the end, the one with the padlock on it, was warm, like something on the other side was breathing. My grandson had found me down there. He was supposed to be upstairs helping his mother unpack boxes, but he'd slipped away, the way 8-year-olds do, and followed me down the stairs. He tugged on my sleeve when I reached for the padlock. "Grandpa, don't go in there." I looked down at him. He had his mother's eyes, brown and steady, but right now they weren't steady at all. "Why not, buddy?" He pressed his lips together. "Marcus says that's where bad things go." I crouched down to his level. My knees weren't happy about it. They haven't been happy about much since I turned 60. "What kind of bad things?" He shook his head. He wouldn't say. He just grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the stairs, and because he was 8 and scared and I didn't want to push him, I went. I told myself I'd ask Marcus about it later. I told myself there was probably a simple explanation. I was wrong about that. I have been wrong about a lot of things in my life. That particular mistake almost cost me my grandson. My name is Raymond Kowalski. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years working for the city of Columbus, Ohio, in the water department. Nothing glamorous. I checked meters, filed reports, drove a truck. I did my job and I did it well, and I retired 18 months ago with a modest pension and a bad back and more time on my hands than I knew what to do with. My wife Eleanor passed in 2019 from ovarian cancer. We were married 34 years. After she was gone, my daughter Claire became the center of my world. Claire and my grandson Danny. Danny was born in 2016. His father, Claire's first husband, left when Danny was 2 years old, packed a bag, said he needed to find himself, and drove to Arizona. He calls on birthdays. Sometimes. Danny doesn't talk about him much. He never really knew him. Claire met Marcus Holt in the spring of 2022 at a work conference. She's an accountant. Marcus sells commercial real estate. They dated for a year and a half, got engaged, and were married in October 2023. I walked her down the aisle. I cried. I'm not embarrassed to say it. I had reservations about Marcus from the beginning. I want to be honest about that. He wasn't unkind to Danny. He wasn't cruel or dismissive. He was just distant, formal, the way some men are with children who aren't theirs. Like Danny was a piece of furniture that had come with the house. A condition of the transaction. But Claire was happy. Genuinely happy. The way she hadn't been in years. And Danny was enrolled in a good school, eating regular meals, sleeping in his own room. I told myself that was enough. I told myself I was being an overprotective old man. Eleanor used to say I worried too much. She was usually right. Marcus's father, Gerald Holt, died in August 2024. Heart attack. Sudden. At 71, Gerald had been a widower for 12 years, living alone in the family home in Bexley, the house where Marcus grew up, the house that Marcus and Claire were now moving into. It made financial sense, Marcus said. The house was paid off. They could rent out their condo downtown, build equity, give Danny a yard. He said it like he was reading from a spreadsheet. I helped them move on a Saturday in November, 3 months after Gerald's death. My truck, a borrowed dolly, 2 trips back and forth across Columbus. Claire was bright and busy, directing traffic, unwrapping dishes, finding the right drawer for everything. Marcus was efficient. Carried boxes, gave instructions, didn't talk much. Danny carried what he could and mostly got in the way, and I loved him for it. It was Danny who asked to see the basement. He'd seen the door at the top of the stairs and he wanted to explore. The way kids do with new houses. Marcus said the basement was off limits until he could check the electrical. He said it like it was nothing. Claire nodded and moved on. Danny looked at me. Something in that look sat in my chest the rest of the day. I couldn't name it then. I can name it now. It was the look of a child who has already learned that certain things aren't to be questioned. I went down to the basement after dinner, after Danny was in bed, after Claire had fallen asleep in the armchair watching television and Marcus had gone upstairs. I told myself I was checking the water heater, the city man in me, 31 years of habit. That's when Danny found me at the warm door with the padlock. That's when he said what he said. Bad things. I asked Marcus about the room the next morning, casual, over coffee. What's in the back room downstairs? Marcus looked up from his phone. What? Back room? The one with the padlock. He set his phone down. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. Just old storage. My dad's stuff. I haven't had a chance to go through it. Why is there a padlock on it? Dad was private about his things. He put a lock on everything. You should have seen the filing cabinet in his office. He locked his mail. I nodded. I drank my coffee. I let it go. I don't know why I let it go. Maybe because I didn't have a concrete reason not to. Maybe because I didn't want to be the interfering father-in-law, the old man who couldn't mind his own business. Maybe because everything Marcus said was plausible, and plausible is an easy thing to accept when you don't want trouble. What I know is that I thought about that warm door for 2 weeks. Thought about it while I was home alone watching the news. Thought about it in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep. Thought about it every time Claire called and mentioned, offhandedly, that Danny had been having nightmares again. That Danny didn't want to sleep in his room. That Danny had started wetting the bed, which he hadn't done since he was 3. He's adjusting, Claire said. New house, new school. It's a lot for a kid. I agreed. I hung up the phone. I sat in my kitchen and I thought about the look Danny had given me at the top of the basement stairs. I drove to Bexley on a Thursday afternoon. Claire was at work. Marcus was at work. Danny was at school. I had a key to the house because Claire had given me one in case of emergencies. I told myself this was an emergency. I told myself I just needed to know. The basement was exactly as I'd left it. Cold, dim, smelling of old years. I walked to the back door, still warm. I put my palm flat against it and held it there. Definitely warmer than it should have been. There was no heat vent nearby, no pipes running close. Just warmth, low and steady, like a living thing on the other side. The padlock was a master lock, the thick kind, the kind you see on storage units and job site trailers. I had not come unprepared. I'd been a city worker for 3 decades. I know how to open things that are meant to stay closed. It took me 11 minutes. I'm not proud of how I did it. I'm not going to explain the specifics. What I will say is that when the lock finally gave and I pulled that door open, what hit me first was the smell. Not rot. Not decay. Something chemical and close and wrong, like a hospital room crossed with a garden shed. Warm, recycled air pushing past me into the cool basement. Inside was a room, roughly 10 by 12 feet. Concrete walls, no windows. A single work light hanging from the ceiling, plugged into an extension cord that ran under the door, which explained the warmth the bulb had been left on. In the far corner, there was an old army green cot with a folded blanket. Against the left wall, a small wooden shelving unit with a tin cup, a plate, a box of crackers. Against the right wall, a heavy wooden chest, the old steamer trunk kind, painted black, with a combination lock on the latch. On the floor, in front of the trunk, drawn in chalk, were the outlines of 2 hands. Small hands, child-sized. I stood there for a long time. Long enough for my eyes to adjust, long enough for my brain to assemble what I was seeing into something I could hold. Then I called my daughter. Claire, I need you to leave work. I need you to come home. Don't tell Marcus. Don't text him. Just come now. Her voice shifted immediately. Dad, what's wrong? Is Danny? Danny's at school. But I need you to see something. And I need you to see it before Marcus gets home. She was there in 40 minutes. I waited on the front porch. When she pulled up and got out of the car, she looked at my face, and her own face changed. I took her to the basement. I showed her the room. I watched her put her hand over her mouth and keep it there. I showed her the cot, the plate, the crackers. I showed her the chalk handprints on the floor. She said, very quietly, "He brought Danny down here." "I don't know that yet." She turned to me. "Dad, the handprints." "I know." She was shaking. Claire doesn't shake. She's her mother's daughter, steady and controlled. I watched her shake and I felt something settle in my chest. Not calm. Something harder than calm. "We need to open the trunk," I said. The combination lock took longer. In the end, Claire found a bolt cutter in Gerald's old toolbox. 2 cuts. The lock fell. Claire lifted the lid. The papers were on top. Folders, dozens of them, rubber-banded in groups. Claire picked up the first bundle, started reading. Her color went wrong. "They're records," she said. "Kids. Ages." I took the folder from her. Gerald Holt had kept meticulous records. The man who locked his mail had locked something far worse. Names I didn't recognize. Dates going back to 1988. Entries written in a small, cramped hand, clinical and cold. Times, durations, what he called correction sessions. Near the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in a plastic shopping bag, was a child's sneaker. 1 sneaker, size 4, the kind with Velcro straps. The Velcro had come loose on one side. It was worn through at the toe. We found out later that the sneaker had belonged to a boy named Caleb Thorne. He had lived 2 streets over. He had been reported missing in the spring of 1994. He was 7 years old. His parents had never stopped looking. I called 911 from the front porch while Claire stayed in the basement. I told the dispatcher what I'd found. She asked me to stay on the line. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. I told her she needed to send somebody who'd seen hard things before, because what was in this basement was going to take a while to understand. They sent 4 officers and a detective named Sandra Wills. She was in her 50s, gray hair pulled back, and she had the kind of face that has heard everything and still manages to listen. She moved through the room slowly, carefully. When she got to the sneaker, she was quiet for a long time. "Mr. Kowalski," she said. "Your son-in-law, is he aware you came here today?" "No." "Does he have any idea what you found?" "No." She nodded. "We're going to need you to go somewhere else for a few hours. We'll send a car to stay with you. And we need to bring your grandson in." "Danny," I said. "Why Danny?" She looked at me directly. "Because we found other things in that room, Mr. Kowalski. Things that suggest it was used recently, within the last few months. The air went out of me, like something had reached into my chest and closed its fist. Within the last few months, Danny had been living in this house for 3 months. Claire drove us to my apartment. We didn't talk much in the car. I watched her hands on the steering wheel, knuckles white, then forced loose, then white again. She was doing the math the same way I was. Every time she'd worked late, every time Marcus had offered to stay home with Danny, every Saturday she'd gone to the grocery store alone. Danny's school released him to a caseworker at 3:15. He came to my apartment at 4 o'clock with a social worker named Beverly, who had kind eyes and a quiet voice and gave Danny a juice box without making a big deal about it. He sat at my kitchen table. He drank his juice. He looked at me and his mother, back and forth, and then he said, "Is it about the room? The room in the basement, baby?" I said. He nodded slowly. He said Marcus takes me down there when I'm bad. He said all boys have a thinking room. He said I wasn't supposed to tell. Claire made a sound I have never heard a person make before or since. She got up from the table and went into the bathroom and closed the door. I heard the water run. I sat with my grandson. "I'm not in trouble, am I, Grandpa?" "You are not in any trouble, buddy. Not even a little bit." He considered that. His juice box made a hollow rattling sound as he finished it. I stayed because he didn't close the door all the way. He always closed the door all the way, so I figured it was okay to stay. He was talking about the room in the basement. He had stayed because the door wasn't closed all the way. An 8-year-old's logic. An 8-year-old's courage. Even if he didn't know it was courage. Do you know what I had been doing while all of this was happening? I had been at home, watching cable news and worrying about my bad back. I had been telling myself I was being overprotective. I had been accepting plausible explanations from a man I did not fully trust because I did not want to be the kind of old man who caused trouble. My daughter came out of the bathroom. Her face was composed the way faces are when composure is something you're holding with both hands. She sat back down at the table. She pulled Danny into her lap, all 63 pounds of him, and she held him the way I held her when she was small and something had frightened her. I watched them and I thought about Eleanor, about what she would have said sitting at this table. She would have said, "Ray, you went. That's what matters. You went." It didn't feel like enough. It still doesn't. Marcus was arrested at his office at 5:47 that evening. Detective Wills told me later that he hadn't run. He'd been at his desk, on a phone call, when they walked in. He looked at the two officers and the detective and he said, very calmly, "I'd like to call my attorney," like a man who had rehearsed the moment. He is still waiting for his trial. The investigation lasted months. What they found in that basement, in the records, in the trunk, in the digital files on a laptop hidden behind the trunk's false bottom, was the history of two men and what they had built together over more than 30 years. Gerald Holt had started it. That's the part that takes the longest to hold. The records went back to 1988, when Marcus was 12 and Gerald was already doing things to children in the neighborhood that nobody had named yet because nobody had been paying close enough attention. The records were Gerald's. The children were neighborhood kids, kids from Gerald's Boy Scout troop, kids who came over for the tutoring sessions he'd offered to parents who were grateful and busy and never thought to ask what happened behind a closed door. Caleb Thorne, 7 years old. Spring of 1994. The sneaker in the trunk. They found remains buried in the backyard of Gerald's old house in Westerville, the house where Marcus grew up, the house that had been sold in 2009 and had 3 subsequent owners who had never dug in the far corner of the garden where the rose bushes were. Caleb's parents were alive. They were in their 60s. They had spent 30 years not knowing. I think about them a lot. I think about what it means to spend 3 decades carrying an open question. I think about the neighbors from Westerville who came forward after the news broke, who said they remembered a quiet man, helpful, always willing to watch the neighborhood kids, who said they'd had small unease, small moments of something almost like suspicion, and had talked themselves out of it because he seemed so normal, because it seemed so unlikely, because getting involved felt like a leap. We make that leap or we don't. That's what I've learned. Everything else is just the story we tell ourselves for not making it. Marcus had watched his father. That's what the child psychologist who evaluated Danny told the court. In cases like this, there are often 2 generations. The child who watched becomes the man who repeats. Not because he can't stop himself, but because something was built in him, early and carefully, that had no other shape. This is not an excuse. The psychologist was very clear about that. It is not an excuse. It is an explanation. And explanations matter because they tell us where to look, in families, in houses, in the rooms where children are taken when no one is watching. Marcus had never had his own children. Claire's son had been an opportunity. That's how Detective Wills put it. And the directness of it made me ill, but she was right. The move to Gerald's old house had been deliberate. The room had been prepared before they arrived. Claire filed for divorce the week of the arrest. She and Danny moved back to her condo. Marcus is in custody pending trial. Gerald is dead. The rose bushes in Westerville have been removed. Danny started seeing a therapist named Dr. Patricia Morell 3 days after everything came out. She's a specialist. She's worked with children who've been through things that shouldn't happen to children. Danny goes every week. He's been going for 14 months now. The first weeks were bad. I won't pretend otherwise. He had nightmares. The kind that bring kids running down the hall at 3 in the morning. The kind where they can't tell you what they dreamed because the dream is too large for words. I spent a lot of nights on Claire's couch, on the floor of Danny's room, my back protesting, not moving until he was asleep. He was afraid of basements. He was afraid of closed doors. He was afraid, for a while, of men he didn't know well, which made school difficult. His teacher was patient. His school counselor was patient. Patricia was patient. Children are not as fragile as we fear, and not as invulnerable as we hope. They find their way through when they are loved. They find their way through. Danny is 9 now. 4th grade. He wants to be a meteorologist when he grows up because he became obsessed with weather radar last spring during tornado season, which is extremely Danny. He still sees Patricia, once a month now instead of weekly. He still doesn't like basements. He probably never will, and that's okay. Some things leave a mark, and you carry the mark and you live your life anyway. Last month he asked me about Caleb. He'd heard something at school, something a kid said, something that found its way back to him the way things do. He asked me at dinner, just the two of us, spaghetti on a Tuesday, and he asked straight out the way he asks things. "Grandpa, there was a boy who died, wasn't there? In that house, before us?" I put down my fork. "Yes, buddy, there was." "Did he have a grandpa?" "He had a dad and a mom. They've been looking for him for a long time." He thought about that while he chewed. "Was he scared?" "I don't know," I said. "I hope someone was there with him." Danny looked at his plate. Then he said, "You were there with me." I had to look away for a moment. Out the window at the November dark, the street lamp, a cat crossing the lawn. "I was there with you," I said. "I'll always be there with you." We finished dinner. He helped me wash the dishes. He's a good kid, my grandson. He has been through something that should not have been his to go through, and he is still kind, still curious, still able to laugh at dumb jokes and argue about bedtime and get genuinely upset about the rules in board games. He is 9 years old and he is still himself, and I will count that as a miracle for the rest of my life. I've thought a lot, since then, about what I almost didn't do. The number of times I could have turned away. The moment in that basement when I touched a warm door and chose to remember it instead of forget it. The night I lay awake in my apartment thinking about the look on Danny's face at the top of the stairs. The Thursday afternoon when I drove to Bexley with a key in my pocket and told myself it was an emergency. It was an emergency. It had been an emergency for months. I was just the last person to understand that. I think about the neighbors in Westerville who had small moments of unease and talked themselves out of it. I was almost one of them. I was so close to being one of them that it keeps me up at night sometimes. The father-in-law who didn't want to cause trouble. The old man who told himself he was being paranoid. Eleanor always said I worried too much. She was right about most things. She was wrong about that. If you're watching this, I want to say something directly to you. If there is a child in your life who has stopped sleeping, who has started being afraid of things they were never afraid of before, who flinches in ways that don't match the moment, who tells you, in small, careful words, that certain places are for bad things, believe them. Don't wait for certainty. Don't wait until you have something you can name, something airtight and undeniable. Ask the question. Touch the warm door. Open the thing that is meant to stay closed. I'm 63 years old. My wife is gone. My knees are bad. I have more mornings behind me than ahead. I spent 31 years checking meters and driving a truck, and I never once thought I would be the person who walked into a basement and stopped something terrible from continuing. But I was the person who walked in. Not because I was brave, not because I was clever, because a small boy grabbed my hand and said, "Don't go in there, Grandpa." And the fear in his eyes was a kind of information, and I kept it. Danny's out back right now. I can see him through the kitchen window of Claire's condo, on the little patch of concrete they call a patio. He's got a weather app on his tablet, and he's talking to himself about pressure systems, very seriously, like a man on television. His hair needs cutting. He's got his mother's eyes. My grandson, alive and loud and arguing with the sky about incoming precipitation. 14 months ago, I almost let the easy explanation win. I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad every single day that I didn't. Thanks for listening. If this story made you think of a child you're worried about, someone who seems afraid, someone who has gone quiet in a way that doesn't feel right, don't wait. You don't have to be sure. You just have to show up. That's all I did. I showed up, and it was everything.